วัสดีค่ะสวัสดีค่ะทุกท่านค่ะ Good afternoon. How are you just now? You had a great lunch? Yes, happy to hear that. At least you had a great lunch. So we can continue with the afternoon session, right? You ready for afternoon session? Thank you ค่ะ So a very warm welcome back to this afternoon session. So I hope it was palatable for you for the lunch. So let me introduce myself once again. My name is Puttathida Nabangchang, or you can call me Bella for short. So I'm truly honored to be the host of this conference for the rest of the day until the dinner talk together. So the afternoon session is very interesting as well because it's going to be about AI, the artificial intelligence or AI, and the challenges of tomorrow. In this session, we will be clarified together that how this AI or sophisticated self-evolving invention will affect us on the challenging us in many ways, like multilateral trade, inequality in society, climate change and self-adaptation, or even lifetime learning, and also geopolitical tension also. In this kind of, we are now in developing or developed countries. And for this session, we honor by 3 speakers and of course, 1 distinguished moderator. So please join me in welcome Dr. Sama Abaze, CEO of Worldwide Group, and คุณดวงทิพย์โฉมปราง Director for International Cooperation Department ITD Mr. John C. Havens, Executive Director, the IEEE Global Initiative on Ethics of Autonomous and Intelligent System. Wow. And of course, we have our significant moderator, which is Dr. Tawisak Gaw Anantakun, Chairman, National Electronics and Computer Technology Center on NACTAC. Yes, thank you very much.
Good afternoon, distinguished participants, panelists of the Trade and Development Regional Forum 2019. Welcome to the second session on the topic Artificial Intelligence and Challenges for Tomorrow. In this session, we are going to discuss the benefits of this wonderful technology to trade system, social inequalities, and global climate adaptation, and so on. The technology is coming so fast, and it's surrounding us. And I think our panelists will help pointing out the way that we will handle all the concerns and the benefits of these technologies. Before going into the session, I'd like to give some opening remarks on AI so that we are all at the same starting point. Well, this year is 2019, right? And I believe that all of you have a mobile phone, personal mobile phone numbers, at least 1 or more. I wonder if anyone in this room don't have email account. Please raise your hand. Any one of you don't have the social network account? So all of you are connected to part of the global network all the time. Now, please raise your hand if you often use this application, Siri, Google Now, or Cortana, or Alexa. Are you using it? Well, not many hands. But are you driving with Navigator? Well, some of you do. Anyway, what I am saying is that AI is now with us. And some of them have been actually inside us all the time, especially those with natural language processing, those with capable of listening, voice recognition, and talking back to you, and go back to do processing. That comes with mobile phones and internet service, because somewhere in the cloud there are some intelligence, some company is working on that, and it serve you. Well, we also have better weather prediction, right, to the district level. But we also have very efficient fake news system, deep fake of video and so on, which is surrounding us right now. So that's what's happening. But somewhere that behind us that we don't see so much is AI in manufacturing, AI in industry, whereby products are created in the age of Industry 4.0. They are designed by men, by women, and they are aided with computer graphics, computer manufacturing. So from your thought, you can speed up all of your designs and testing, and then go into the machine that produce things very fast. And the product comes out with better quality than the past because it's better engine. But at the same time, the management of this industry and production is handled by algorithms, software, that helps you reducing the cost of stocking, zero inventory, and so on, and make the production very lean and efficient. And I believe that to be competitive, industry requires a lot of technology to make them survive. But the third group is something that is towards the future. I wonder if AI will make us healthier. Will it make us live longer? Will it help the doctors to help people in a better way? Better. Will it help you from avoiding road accidents? Or will it help musicians to make better music? Will it teach your kids better than the teacher? And so on. These are the sort of things that are coming along. And we are going to concern about whether the good things that comes with AI, which really means a lot of technologies, which includes drones, Internet of Things, and many things that comes along. So I would like our panelists to discuss on the concerns that the dark side of AI might create even more inequalities, because someday computers of some companies are smarter than people, and in the near future or long future, we don't know, machines can even become smarter than the whole humanities. At that moment, we call it singularity. So I believe that these are the points that our panelists will help pointing out that the issues and the ways that we are going to handle the future. Now with this, I would like to introduce our panelists. First, Dr. Salma Abbasi. She was educated in the UK and the US and have long experience in Silicon Valley. You name the company like Digital Equipment Corporation, Ascent, Lucent. And she's presently Fellow of Royal Geographical Society of UK, and she works in UAE as a CEO of eWorldwide Group. Please welcome Dr. Salma Abbasi. Now the second speaker is Kun Duangtip Chomprang. She's an expert in trade, value chain in circular economy, lean production, digital trade production, open standards and internet governance. And she was educated in Thailand and UK, and currently she is the Director of International Cooperation of the ITD. Please welcome Kun Dwang Thip. And our third speaker, which will also be the key speaker for the dinner tonight, is John Evans. Well, he is Executive Director of the IEEE Global Initiative for Ethical Consideration in Autonomous and Intelligent Systems. His experience includes being a EVP of a top 10 PR firm and Vice President of tech startup, and he wrote interesting books and many articles and regular keynote speakers for many companies. Please welcome John Evans. Now, in order to start up our session, I would like to give between 10 and 15 minutes to each speaker to go through their prepared presentation. Start with Dr. Salma, please.
Good afternoon, everybody. Swadika and Assalamu alaikum. I am delighted and honored to be here today. I appreciate the invitation from ITD and the previous panelists before me. Their thought-provoking statements have touched my heart and mind. And I would like to share a few points before I begin in three pieces. I first want to know you a little bit. So the first question I want to do, especially after we've eaten, is if you could put your hand up if you're a technologist. Anybody here study technology, or are you all economists? One. Okay, very few technology people. Okay, good to know. So I myself have been a technologist for my whole career, 28 years in Silicon Valley. And my last job was a senior vice president of Lucent Technology, who makes the switch. And my job was always meeting dissatisfied people. You never call somebody to say, great job. You always say, this is wrong and that's wrong. Think about yourself. When you pay money, you want something fantastic. So I called myself the executive apologizer. After doing that, for many, many years, I retired. But in my DNA is something called problem solving. And I opened up my company in Dubai 19 years ago. By some miracle at the Salat, which is a mobile operator. How many people have been to Dubai? That has to be many of you. You can see Dubai is a glittering city. In 1980, Dubai was very, very different. But through the passage of time, it's taken on technology and innovation like you cannot imagine. They are adopters of technology. Anyway, so during the course of my life, we've had the opportunity of working with the monorail company in Dubai, RTA, when they first started the project, and we were helping them with the project strategy and the organizational transformation for the future. Many, many people said that no one is going to use a monorail in Dubai, it's too hot. And I myself, if I go on a short trip, I use the train from the airport to my office. It's very easy. So change does happen if it's convenient to the people, but a lot of people reluctant to change. Now, my experience with my organization has led us to really understand the MDGs and the reason why they failed, and now the SDGs. So we typically work with developing countries to address and streamline and integrate achievements towards the SDGs through stakeholder engagement, capacity building, and looking at the actual local need. So I'm linked to the presentation of my colleagues before. As a technologist, I have to stand back and say, when I look at development and I look at trade, I see there's no infrastructure, there's no water, there's no power. So we have to come down to the ground and be practical at the solutions that we offer, that they can be impactful, sustainable, holistic, and most importantly, scale. Because you don't have a small little village, you have a whole country that you need to transform, and millions of citizens you need to include to leave no one behind. In that context, I have partnered with the IEEE. John, this is the first time I'm meeting him, but I'm working with several IEEE committee meetings to plan and help to bring the experiences to the forefront of development and technology for good. Now, coming back to Dubai, which is obviously everybody's interested in how Dubai makes itself be the first of everything in many areas. The most important thing is that in Dubai, over the last, let me say, the last 10 years, there's been a shift. And the shift is to recognize that we need to have young leaders. Young leaders, and when I mean young, how many people here are under 30? Put your hand up. Under 30. Okay, a few, good, a quarter. Now, it's frightening. I'm over 60, so I'm like double your age. In my opinion, one of the biggest reasons for the early adoption in Dubai is because they have put young leaders, even if they are the sons that have been educated or the daughters that have been all educated in the US, they come back and they give them the support that is needed. They listen to the innovation. They have no shortage of money. So there's a political will to change and be the best and the first. And they've trained their young generation and they've given them this seat, a position of responsibility and power. This is an example that you can see in them being one of the first countries to have and identify an AI ministry in 2017. Umar is a very young man, but he has a vision. He's pushed a campaign out, which is Think AI in the UAE. And they want to, there's the first country in the world where I ever saw a fire engine which was a Ferrari. Can you imagine a Ferrari car? Somebody was in the brain to say, I want to be able to get very quickly to that location. So they try things out and then they say, doesn't necessarily work. They have a minister of happiness, also a lady. In this context, her charter is different from the one in Bhutan that you talk about. I think that's still emerging and learning in what does it really mean to define happy. And are you scared to say that you're unhappy? That's the other thing with the political environment. Can you be open and honest? Is there trust? Which, again, this morning sort of brought out some of those points. But what they have done is they have made a declaration that they want to be the global hub of AI. They want to be seen as the leaders in AI. Now, one of our partners in the UAE is the American University of Dubai. It has startups creating a nurturing environment for young entrepreneurs and oodles of money from venture capitalists that want to find the biggest and best idea. And in fact, their provost is a former colleague of mine from Lucent Technologies. He used to work in Saudi and he's a Lebanese. Guess what the challenge is in the UAE? There's no local population. So you want to have the brilliant minds. You want to have innovation and you want to promote your own local people. But without a population, how do you do it? You bring smart people in from India, from around the world, from other countries, but that's not your local knowledge. So you have to see where they have a gap and a shortcoming. And they're obviously trying to address this. But one of the biggest problems that we have is to say and encourage the local population who have everything. Today, and actually this whole week, last week gone, I have been learning a lot about Asia Pacific. Even though I used to work here a few decades ago, I'm learning a lot. I didn't realize that Thailand was #1 in inequalities. So I'm hoping that my experience and relevance from Africa will actually help you think along different lines. But coming back to the UAE. So the UAE have used, I don't know if anybody uses the Emirates Airlines Airbus A380. It's a hotel in the sky. It scares me. I'm a civil engineer, electrical engineer, and my PhDs in ICTs. But believe me, when this aircraft flies and there's turbulence, I have to worry. Now, I fly every week somewhere. However, I have experienced three times, an aborted landing in Dubai. Guess why? drones. Okay, so we're marching 100 miles per hour, bringing in new technology, but we're not regulating it, which is my caution earlier on. Now, there is absolutely AI integrated into healthcare, as my colleague, the moderator, mentioned, to do the proactive monitoring and provide the healthcare to the people who have mobility issues and to the elderly. And in education, believe it or not, to be able to guide customized training suited to the aptitude of the child, which is great. But who wrote the algorithm? So the third and final part of my discussion will be about my fears from AI and the bias written in the coding that is there. Now, there is the robot. If anybody's been to the police station, one of our projects is also with the police transformation in Abu Dhabi and Dubai. And there you have a white robot that is a woman robot and is taking your bills, and it's like a little ATM machine. So you have the experience and the fun. There's robotic competitions and trying to get the public comfortable with this, let me say, a humanoid in front of them. And they also have now implemented autonomous vehicles that are surveilling communities. Small, it's like a toy car, but it's piloting thing. Their vision to be the futuristic city of the world is taking small pieces but putting it together because there's political will and money. So we have flying taxis in Dubai. We have robots in Dubai. They even have made a commitment for a space program to go to Mars. They want to build a mini city in Mars. And the doctor this morning, she was saying, why? So the question always comes, why? But the other phenomena that is happening in the Middle East is also the focus on racing. I have the biggest skyscraper. I have the biggest tower. So now Saudi Arabia has also made a declaration with its announcing that it's going to have the Neon City, and the Prince Salman is the driver behind this, to bring in all technology and innovation. And they've actually been the first country to give a robot citizenship. Now, does that make sense? It makes sense, okay. So that is enough of the Middle East. So now let's talk about AI onto the topics that my colleague has asked me to talk about. Now, multilateral trade systems. One of the most important things for us to be able to think about when we talk about trade, and I'm not talking about it in the context of China and the US conflicts, male egos at play. I'm talking about trade in the context of women, humanity, and inclusion. As my brother, businessman, said earlier, I appreciate that very, very much. Because my feeling is if we, half of us here are old, we are looking at creating a space for the next generation. It's life for them. The SDGs is for them. The planet is for them. So unless we include them and create that enabling environment holistically with, Sarah will talk about it, with the right skills, with the right environment, with the right support structure, we will not be successful. So within the economic system of trade, we have started a program in schools in Nigeria, in boarding schools for girls in the most deprived areas, teaching them about agriculture practices, nutrition, not even balanced, but adequate diet. I'm just looking at the time. Adequate diet, I could talk forever, but anyway, adequate diet, but also about how to become traders. Young girls who may have suffering from early marriages, they will have the skill to earn money and be able to feed themselves and their children and learn about child spacing. But at the same time, we're also teaching them about processing food so that they can actually become agents in that whole value chain of agriculture. There is an opportunity to partner with, again, I've lived in UAE, so I have to promote the UAE. There's a fantastic company there called DPW, Dubai Ports. Google them. They've just made a 25% growth in this year, and we work with them in Africa. They're building dry ports, a lovely example of Rwanda, tiny, tiny countries in Africa. Rwanda, Uganda, Kenya. I'm sorry the Secretary General isn't there, but there's a tri-company agreement to promote trade. And they're using technology and AI in a very smart way to process the goods. This morning a colleague mentioned maybe we have to rethink import-export. Absolutely. But technology is enabling them. And in the regions, logistics is a key part to help us preserve our foods and get to the market quickly and reduce the waste that happens and support the SDG for hunger, safe access to food. I'm moving now to social inequalities. There's a skill gap. We talk about social inequalities. This morning my colleague was very nicely giving examples of digital literacy or the lack of the digital divide. But then add to that the gender digital divide. So you have women that are even further pushed out of this space. So we need to think inclusively how we address this. And again, I'm going to give some examples of Africa where we're working with universities to teach medical students about telemedicine, remote consultation, so that when they get a medical degree, they also know how to use technology so that they can go to the rural areas. We're making the healthcare centers in villages agriculture hubs, so we share the infrastructure. So what is important that within the government framework and the partnership has to be people, public, private partnership, so that you have the access points that are there, but you bring the private sector to address the local village need. This in itself has enabled us to provide upskilling to doctors of the local area, but at the same time give new differentiation skills in the digital space for doctors, which I think is a wonderful skill to have. In the context of climate change adaptation, we are working with Airbus, and 18 months ago, we did a fantastic malnutrition study in Africa and then created a 13-point strategy, one of which is the agriculture, industrialization, and trade transformation. In that context, we've been using satellite technology for smart irrigation, understanding drought, floods, harvest times, but also mapping the local environment and promoting business, promoting entrepreneurs to fill the gap, not the government. So we're creating a series of smart village industry clusters. You don't have to do the same thing. Look and see what your unique opportunity is, and partnership with business. In this space, we're building resilience to climate change. In our ecosystem, we are creating entrepreneurs as agri-technopreneurs, but traders, logistics, vehicle drivers, clean renewable energy, solar power entrepreneurs, water entrepreneurs. So we've holistically looked at the system and where the gaps are and filled in those with our thinking for this program, the agriculture transformation. The last point I'm going to make, if I have a few minutes, do I have a minute more? Am I okay? Okay. The last point I want to make is linked to lifelong learning. In the context of lifelong learning, we are encouraging people to use the internet and taking classes and remote courses, and people are taking degrees all over the world. But at the same time, we need to be able to teach people about safe and secure use of the internet and making sure that people don't get into bad habits. There needs to be a balance. And one of the innovative programs I have learned from the US is something called cyber citizens. Since we might be senior cyber citizens, in England, over 60, you become a senior citizen. So I'm a senior cyber citizen now. But what we're doing is, I'm joking, but I'm very serious, copied from America, bringing it to the UK. We're creating clusters in cities of England where grandparents are coming together, and they're learning how to use the internet, but they're also learning how to watch their grandchildren because the parents are working and there's no supervision. So we're creating a safe space for children to be after school care with the grandmother, I say grandmother, but it could be grandfather, but grandmother looking at the child. But at the same time, as the government pushes more and more services online, now you're being able to include the excluded British senior citizens that, I can't see the numbers sometimes on mobile phones, let alone listening push this, push that. I have to go back to the beginning because I forgot what they said. So that happens to me, and I'm an active person. So in lifelong learning, it's important to make sure that you target what you want to do in that space. And lastly, one of the colleagues said that to interact with Facebook was free. And I would like to bring up the point that it's not free. It is our lack of awareness that we are commodities. We are products. Our data. I came to Bangkok. I'm getting so many emails about Bangkok hotels. So the AI in scooping my system and my data hasn't got the intelligence to learn that Dr. Salma is here. She doesn't need a hotel again. She's already checked in. So that's a simple example. But think about complex situation when you rely on AI to give you information on your medicine, give you the reminders. It cannot teach you humanity, integrity, ethics, empathy, and most importantly, compassion. I hear many people talk about AI as going to be the perfect nurse, the caregiver of the elder. What do we need? My mother's always telling me, she wants my time. She doesn't need anything from me but my time, which is very difficult. So people need time. It's important to understand. This morning I must clarify, when I was saying learn from the developed countries, or those societies that are so stuck in technology, I meant humanity, the deterioration of our society. When you honestly have a conversation with people in England, they will tell you that they are getting divorced. There's online sex. I can't imagine what that is. There's people gambling. People losing their houses, addiction to the extent of hundreds of thousands of pounds a day. And there's a little logo coming from the government that says, safe gambling. How can you gamble safely in the nature of gambling? Then we have a problem with internet gaming, where children are playing samurai games. People in England that never knew about knives know about samurai knives. And they're the young people. There is some research to confirm, but we're working with government to research further in this area. But remember, we are giving our data to the medical. We're giving our information to education institutions. We're giving our data to transportation. We're giving our data to financial institutions. They are looking and analyzing that data with algorithms, and that's all institutional theft. On the other side, we have our pictures on Facebook. We share everything from the day we're born, even when we're in the stomach. Some people put ultrasound images up. That's an invasion of my privacy if I grow up and I say to my mummy, why did you do this to me? But until we die, even when we become retired, we are continuously targeted and bombarded. That's the future you have to look forward to. So the exploitation and exposure is unintentionally from your family with social media. But the institutions and the big business, like the Facebooks, the Googles that are out there, Amazon, everybody's following your patterns and analyzing you to say, how can I pitch you something that you will then buy? So we have to be very careful as we promote and push technology in this area, and look to use technology to address the plight of refugees and the women who are suffering at the moment, the Rohingya refugees that are there. Look constructively of how we can use technology and trade to economically empower and bring back dignity in these people rather than gaming. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Salma. That's very provocative, right? You talk about young people and senior people. In fact, all of us here are digital migrants. And people who are younger than 30 is called digital natives, because you were born after the year of the PC. Well, let's move along on trade, where Kun Duangtip will share with us your thinking. You can either sit down here or
I will sit down. I will not be provocative, but my facts will be equally provocative. There are many ways to be provocative. If I can have my slides on. So let's talk about two things. The first layer, the immediate, things that we can touch, the things that we think we understand, And then we go underneath that, which is what the trade implications on AI is. So if yes, okay. So let's just start with the obvious. So we're talking about technology, not just AI. AI is just one of the many technologies involved. Okay, so hello. Okay. This is something you already know. We're moving from physical products and services to some extent to bits, ownership to rights. We don't own things. The end of private assets or not, that's a question we'll have to answer. We're moving away from finished goods to unbundling. In other words, we don't actually know what we're consuming going forward and how it's going to be assisted through technologies like AI, Internet of Things, and a whole lot of other things that we're not yet seen. Okay, so like maybe you, John, are the tower that blocks my... Okay, so the immediate impact, and I'll go into the detail, is this. The future ability to export will be affected. The future ability to produce, manufacturing basically, will also be affected, and the future ability to access technology in ways that we require permission to do so, and that might not be the right thing. Okay, so the immediate thing is, if you look at technology, the most immediate thing you can think of is the e-commerce and digital transaction. So if I were to try to quantify the economic activity, I'd look at domain names. So here is a domain name by market valuation, .com, .cn, which is China, .tk, .de, which is Germany. To give you a sense, this is one way of looking at the future of how technology is quantified in your economy. But again, we haven't changed the way we look at the digital economy. This is just basically the same classification. If you go by country or as a nation, you go through what we call a country code, a top-level domain name or CCTLD, you'll see that China.cn is the largest economy. Why am I showing you this? So if you go back perhaps 7 years ago, when there was a slowdown of the world economy, especially trade, you'll see that certain economies have actually been going on a positive growth while their GDPs are actually detracting. And the reason for that is because if you actually take an excerpt from the transactions that are happening by the CCTLD, you'll see that they are positive growth. In short, the message is simply this, that a great deal of digital trade that is happening today, whether we actually quantify them in our accounts or in any other form that you can think of, it is basically driving most of the trade today that we don't actually see. So, okay, all right. Another way to look at the future of technology and to look at how we will compete is who will have the bigger computer. So my friend here from UAE was saying, yes, Dubai and Saudi Arabia or UAE are trying to compete on who's got the biggest. But if we talk about data, we talk about AI, and we talk about quantum computing, the next level of what we call computing, then perhaps then we need to look at the capacity of a country's ability to process these data in a meaningful way to create competitiveness. Here's the thing, we can't ignore it. Now this is numbers that was taken actually from the EU. On the top layer on your very left is traditional delivery, which is basically your conventional trade, and then digitally delivered. The middle one tells you the impact on the balance of payment, which is in the year 2017. It's positive, it's above 0. But balance of payment without digital services actually quantified here is actually showing a negative. In other words, really, economic growth going forward is really inclusive of things that are going to be technology driven. This is the first effect of technology, market-sided platforms. And platforms here, we used to say it's two-sided markets, but actually there are multiple-sided markets today. And what is the danger of multi-sided markets for us. This. When one player has access to, for instance, data or privileged information into different markets, what they can do is subsidize another market in which they have in order to basically create a market share on another market that they want to target. So what they do is basically control the demand of that particular product or market itself. And what you get is this curve. Okay, where's this? Here. Okay, sorry. You get this curve here, which in other words is by manipulating the demand on a multi-sided platform, by subsidization, this particular platform has a price monopoly. He can price it as high as he wants based on different types of business models using platforms. So this is where you distort the market and the nature of competition. And you do a whole lot more when you have AI, where AI is actually very powerful in getting insights into, customers' behavior in purchasing and, other things, personal information as well. The other part that is also concerning is that with technology, and technology usually are proprietary, generally speaking, they are now being introduced into trade agreements. As you can see on the red, you'll see at least prior to 2019, prior to a bit earlier before the internet, let's put it that way, the internet was introduced to the world in 1991, you'll see that trade agreements didn't have IPRs. And now you see them having IPRs with those red things, which means this complicates how we do trade, whether it's multilateral trade or plurilateral trade or bilaterals that you have to negotiate. The other impact of AI, and this is actually very broad-based, is this particular study was made by the Futures Commission in the US, where as of today, as of 2012 and 2016, more than 50% of these markets are now traded through AI. Precious metal is almost 100% of the listed items, agricultural produce 200%. And what does it tell you? It tells you basically that the margins are very thin. And in the past, people make money out of this, difference, what we call the arbitrage effect. But we don't really care about brokers and financial intermediaries. What we care about are, for instance, farmers who grow crops. And these crops are basically crops that may be traded on these future markets, which are traded through AI. And these future markets, basically, when you trade with what we call index or derivatives, basically leave very little opportunity for farmers to actually hedge their position. Or two, in the case where AI allows middlemen to find the best markets with the lowest prices, farmers basically don't really have much power in terms of bargaining. So these platforms, based on this particular US study, what is more concerning is that because the margins are getting so thin, they've started aggregating, they started acquiring a lot of these platforms to become big platforms so they can have the scale in order to earn decent margins. So all of this, basically, you might think that at the futures market that it doesn't impact our farmers or even our export market. It does. So the price, the market price, is not predicated on the natural supply and demand any further. So this is just to show you the volatility, the variation in the margins of what I was just mentioning. The other aspect, when I was mentioning that trade agreements now have IPRs, one of the essential aspects of Industrial 4.0 is introducing digitalization into your production system, which means that you need to use technology, and technology generally requires you to get what we call standard essential patents involved. So we talk about Internet of Things. So Internet of Things is not made up of itself, but rather it includes different technologies, different standards. And these standards, some of them have patents. And some of these patents, if you are trying to produce something, will require you to ask permission or pay royalty. So unless some of these patents become standard essentials, meaning that allow other people to use it, you basically are not allowed to compete because you can't produce these things. So if you're very technology dependent, then standard essential patents, which may be negotiated at an enterprise level or at a treaty level, is very concerning. So this is the Industry 4.0. As you can see, if we look from a technology perspective, the fourth one is the CEP, the Cyber Physical System. It's basically robotics and all the system that digitizes your production system. So apart from introducing technology into the play, it also introduced other non-tariff barriers that are quite interesting. An example is the digital rights management. Now, it's basically one way of controlling how innovation can be accessed, can be used, and how much you can negotiate because you have to actually pay for them. But one simple example is geo-blocking. So if you are in a country or a region, like a developing country, that doesn't have a lot of economic power, what happens is that you will get products that are perhaps degraded products. In other words, it's still quality products, but you don't get the best technology. So that's what geo-blocking is. A very simple example would be a textbook. If you go to the US, I'm sorry, I don't want to choose US, but just an example, since a lot of Thais go to the US, you'll have a textbook only to be distributed in the US. But then when you buy a similar one that looks exactly the same in say, somewhere parts in Asia, it's only to be sold in Asia Pacific. So that's geo-blocking. So technology also is done that way through what we call the DRM. It's a type of technology. Of course, standard essential patents are already mentioned. AI trading system, digital taxation. So we haven't figured out how we're going to tax these big companies, although we have a moratorium that we've agreed that we will not tax digital transactions. But we've already seen France, we've seen a few other countries, I think China has started taxing. So we don't actually have a uniform approach on how we tax. The other aspect of it is the limitation on tax and data mining, and this impacts AI immediately. I think this is part of the EU directive. If you want to have AI in your enterprise or even in your economy, you will need a lot of data, a minimum of at least 1 million data points. A minimum, that's a minimum. In order for you to do that, you would have to scour the entire ecosystem in order to basically use these data so you can train your AI to be smart and predictive. It requires it to go through this process. So in order to do that, this particular provision, I don't know if it's called a directive or is it a regulation yet, but it's found in the EU where limitation on tax and data mining means that you are not allowed, you're basically not allowed to go into the internet or into the system to just get data from anyone. You're not allowed. But today, as you know, Google, Facebook, and everyone else is actually just scouring all these data from everywhere. And of course, there's a whole lot of other things that are product liability that emerges from technology, but for another time. This is the technical trade barrier purely for AI. All right? As you can see, China has one of the highest, and Thailand is about 43 out of 64 countries, Taiwan being the most liberal at the lowest. So there is already barrier in terms of how AI is actually going to be used to compete on trade. And last but not least, when we talk about standard essential patents, what is more concerning is for countries that are trying to industrialize and become, what we call industrial 4.0 economies, there is a growing concern where a lot of companies today, for instance, if you think of big companies that manufacture, for instance, like Caterpillar, right? It's a truck, right? Well, it's not a truck. What is it? It's a crane. Yeah, it's a crane. So Caterpillar, and this is just a theoretical example. This is not a real thing. Caterpillar no longer wants to manufacture their cranes. What they do is they sell their knowledge through by basically just patenting their technology and then basically licensing them out to get royalties. So what is happening today is a lot of these manufacturing companies are now becoming IP-driven companies. So that is concern because then where is the productivity coming from going forward? So for developing countries, we have to pay in order to use these technologies. So this is what is happening. You can see why it is very lucrative for companies that have technology, that are manufacturing, becoming technology companies, becoming IP companies. So the return is very high compared to the S&P gold index and the S&P 500. So the return on investment capital is very, very different. So these things are of concern. Why? Because if you look at this chart, you'll know that technology is going to be monopolized by this group of companies, and this means that we are preemptively not allowed to have access to more higher-end technology because it's blocked through what we call monopolization of technology. So this is actually something that was studied by a professor in New York University that we've consulted with. But also the UNTAD report last year showed that a lot of multinationals now don't have what we call sales margin. What they make profits is called royalties. And GDPR, I'll forget. And lastly, I guess, is to basically give you with AI, what we actually need is looking at how do we do more certification. In other words, just don't do manufacturing, but also to promote trade in services, and services basically have higher profit margins on returns. And of course, de minimis, this is the tax system. And last but not least, technology or even AI. What is its role in Sustainable Development Goal? Today, and these are statistics from WHO, that only 1% of drugs that have been researched by large pharmaceuticals address diseases in developing countries. And if we're talking about ending poverty, only 1% of R&D by multinationals on agriculture solutions are solutions for developing countries, are only 1% out of the totality of it. So if we're looking at AI must do good. Technology must do good. And so we are in a threshold at this point of what's the next step will determine whether this story changes. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Dong Tip, for your sharing on the trade issues, which are many dimensions. Now let me turn to John. Please. Okay. Oh, by the way, John, please introduce IEEE.
Stand here at the podium. No, it's okay, I don't need it. I'm John. How are you, Bangkok? Hello, Bangkok. Can you wave? Is that good? I don't really need the podium. I'm John, and I'm proud to be a part of an organization called IEEE. IEEE is the world's largest technology association. It's the heart of the global engineering community. It was founded over 100 years ago by Thomas Edison. I should say today I will be speaking for myself in the sense of the things that I'm saying are not necessarily all formal IEEE position statements. I will say this though, by the way, this speech is my title for tonight. I'm not doing this talk now, so I might talk about some of these things. But the reason I'm so excited to work for and with IEEE is their tagline. Their tagline is advancing technology for humanity. And I love that. If their tagline was advancing humanity for technology, I wouldn't be working here. Or if their tagline was just advancing technology, as much as I love technology. So before I get into artificial intelligence, let me ask some questions like my friend and colleague Salma did. So first of all, please raise your hand if you're a human being. Go ahead and raise your hand if you're a human. Anyone here a human? Raise your hand if you have human parents, and that can be whether you're adopted or not. Human parents. Okay? And raise your hands if in your midst you have human children, meaning you are a parent, or you in any way ever come into contact with human children. Go ahead and raise your hand. If you didn't raise your hand, I'm not sure what you're doing. I want to ask all those questions because I travel a lot. I love traveling. I was in Beijing 5 weeks ago. I was in Egypt 4 weeks ago. And here's one thing I find that's common. And I want to talk about this. And you're asking me, why am I not talking about artificial intelligence? And I'll tell you in a second. But first of all, I work in ethics. And a lot of times ethics is about asking questions that you don't always think to ask. And I like thinking about what brings people together. And here's one thing when I travel, I also love talking to taxi drivers because I feel like I at least get 20 minutes to talk with someone kind of real. Not that everyone isn't real, but I mean like someone from the area. And here's some of the thing I find that's common in all of my travels. People love their kids. Who here is a parent? Anybody a parent? No shame if you're a parent or not, by the way. If you're a parent, raise your hand again. Keep your hand in the air if you love your kids. Keep your hand in the air if you would do anything to make sure that your kids are safe and that they have a life where they can live in relative peace. Okay, I don't want to shock you, but this is pretty common around the world. These are the things that bring us together. All right, let me ask you another question. This is going to sound awkward, but let's just do it, okay? I want, what I'm going to do is, I'm going to ask you how much money you make, okay? How much money you make per year, and then we're going to line people up, and whoever is the most rich goes over there, and then as your salary goes down, we'll line you up in the rest of the room. And we have about 300 people here. Those 5 or 6 people will make decisions for everyone else. Is that okay? Raise your hand if you think that's a good idea. Anybody? No hands? Okay. I'm trying to be provocative because the slide up here a minute ago was talking about GDP. And I was so thrilled that my colleagues were mentioning gross national happiness. Because the thing about gross national happiness and other metrics of well-being is it's not actually about happiness. Like, let's be happy all the time. I'm happy. Are you happy? We know in the well-being world, my dad was a psychiatrist. Psychiatry means you ask hard questions. Being happy doesn't always mean, if you think about well-being, being happy doesn't mean my mood is always up. Well-being means understanding grief, recognizing grief. My dad died in 2011, and I miss him every single day. Am I always happy about that? Not at all. The other thing about happiness, which a lot of times we don't focus on enough, is gratitude. Why is gratitude so critically important? And my dad was a psychiatrist. I've studied a lot of work in what's called positive psychology. Positive psychology, if you think about traditional psychoanalysis, there's this idea that as a human, we're sort of a vase filled with water. And the water is our pain. And with good therapy, or with people who love us, we can remove that pain. And in one sense, that's psychiatry. Positive psychiatry says, well, what about filling that vase with something positive? And gratitude, why gratitude is so incredibly important, and I will be getting to artificial intelligence, I promise. Gratitude lets you say, what do I have now? Not what can I get down the road, and that I'm only worth something once I make this much money, or I have this much stuff, or me compared to you, I have more than you, so I mean more than you. That doesn't make sense to me. What makes sense is for me to say in my life, I have a wife I've been married to for 22 years. She's the biggest gift anyone could ever have. I mean, she's my wife, but you know what I mean. I have 2 kids. Every day I say thank you that those kids are in my life. I have them now. Okay. I bring all this up because there's this temptation to first of all put artificial intelligence in one box, as if it's one technology. And as my moderator colleague knows, there's machine learning, there's deep learning, there's inverse reinforcement learning, there's all different types of learning. And as Salma, as both my other panelists talked about, also, artificial intelligence, it's like saying the word the internet. It is in all the things we already have. The title of this talk, someone made it singularity. Singularity is this idea that in 10 years, someone's going to go, look, my phone is a real person. It's a person. The singularity, in one sense, is already here. If we are so distracted into thinking that AI in and of itself can solve all of our problems, when the thing I just said about who's the richest, how absurd did that sound? How rude did that sound? Yet with GDP, that's the focus of our lives. On a societal level, it's not that GDP is evil. We have to have finances, we have to have economics. But we're the only lens for GDP is productivity and exponential growth. I have news. What artificial intelligence was built to do in general is to make things faster and bigger, and that can be wonderful. And I will focus on positive things. AI is doing amazing things with statistics for well-being indicators. It's doing glorious things with helping people in therapeutic situations. But it's not about the tech. It's about the framing of how we use artificial intelligence. Because I stopped watching my time like 10 minutes ago, so I've probably been talking for 45 minutes. One other thing I want to point out, the GDP, what it doesn't count. The GDP wasn't built to count 2 things, which we must prioritize now. And as I also was sort of joking, saying, who here is a human? You know, the other thing all of us share wherever I go is this planet. The GDP does not measure environmental aspects. When I was in high school, I worked in a record store. So I'm showing you my age. Records. Do you young people know what records are? I don't mean facts. I mean actual discs you put on a record. Anyway, so my boss one time, he said, how much profit did we make this week? And I said, we sold $2,000 worth of records. That's our profit. He said, no, that's our gross profit. Our net profit, you have to take away what I pay you and also what I pay in rent. And everyone here is like, well, of course. Well, if you know accounting, that's called double entry bookkeeping. The GDP is not. When an oil tanker crashes into an island, the GDP goes up because for that year more jobs happen. But the next 8 or 9 or 10 or 15 years don't count the decimation to the environment and the loss of jobs. The GDP goes up in a traffic jam. Why? Because as you're sitting there, more gas is consumed. Does your well-being go up in a traffic jam? Raise your hand if your well-being goes up in a traffic jam. This is another thing all humans share. We don't like traffic jams. So the thing about the GDP not measuring the climate means that it's not counted, means that's why our planet is at the point where last year, this is not the singularity. We are at a climate singularity right now. The World Health Organization says last year, 7 million people died from pollution. Pollution. This isn't plastics in the oceans yet. This isn't whatever else. This is last year, 7 million people. That's Manhattan. Gone. Why are we not all talking about using AI first and foremost to deal with climate change? First, rather than thinking about what happens when machines maybe become sentient. Well, that's cool to think about. I want this planet here for my kids. I want this planet here for your kids. You know, the other thing, and I'll end on this, you know what the GDP also does not measure, was not built to measure, is caregiving. Caregiving. That means if you stay at home and raise your kids, you are invisible to the GDP. Guess who spends most of the time caregiving around this planet? Women. So if you know the transitive theory of math, and I know very little math, so enjoy. The GDP doesn't measure caregiving. Most caregivers are women. The GDP doesn't measure women. Ladies, raise your hand if you think that's not cool. Anybody? Ladies, should you be measured by GDP? I'm not a woman. I'm raising my hand for this. I have a wife and a daughter. I'm not trying to be funny. What is counted is what is deemed important. What we measure is what matters. What we don't measure doesn't get counted. It's not there. The environment and caregivers are not measured in the GDP. Happiness, well-being, we can talk about what that means. Guess what? If you're not measuring it, it's not there at all. AI has the opportunity to measure these things. That's the priority. People in the planet need to be measured, need to be cared for. First, then all these other glorious things that the technology can do, awesome. I'm selfish. I want my kids to have a planet that they can live on. I am selfish. I want women and caregivers to be measured for how they deserve to be measured. Then these beautiful technologies can make the people on the planet flourish first. That's my goal.
Well, we have finished our first round with all your free speech of the three panelists. Now, I am welcoming the questions from the floor, but in the meantime, we will go around on our discussion. Perhaps I would like to come to Dr. Salma first. You talk about education, smart agriculture, young people, kids, and so on. Well, which is in tone, in agreement with John. And perhaps my question is how we can handle the progress of technology in a good way that will assist the well-being of people.
I think that's a very good question. Excellent presentation. I think one of the things that we have to go back and remember in history, believe it or not, in the olden days we used to teach children about ethics and values, how to respect elders. So at the moment we're actually going back. We've created a new curriculum which is focusing on ethics, humanity, and civic responsibility, so that we can teach young people how to behave. It's missing sometimes at home. The second thing is, this is important, why? At primary school level, or even younger if you can. But at primary school, because the child's mind is formed very early, if they can care about people, then we can be less selfish. It has to be the us, not the me. The other thing is, in the use of technology, last year, 2017, we developed some curriculum on ICT training. And not the regular standard ICT training, but it was digital literacy with a proficiency and use. What does it mean for me? What can I do with it? And the most important aspect of that was to teach the teachers first. Different pedagogical practices so that they would understand, not just an exercise of here's a computer, do this, change your password, etc. These are the kind of exercises you can give the children that will charge their brains with some form of critical thinking, the ability to analyze, the ability to research and understand information and synthesize. Because at the moment things are so easy, children are missing that aspect. So teachers and children, and then also, it may be too late, but also teaching developers ethics. With the government of Austria, we partnered on a developers forum, which was really enlightening because the audience, 6,000 developers, and the person that was there was Steve Wozniak from Apple, who was exactly the same as I saw him in the 70s and 80s. We were trying to say to young people that you need to care about what you're doing. What is the consequences of the algorithms and the work that you're doing for your company? And many of the young people came back, or the developers came back and said, what can we do? This is our job. This is what our firm has asked us to do. They want you to create this program that hooks people into technology, hooks them into gambling, hooks them into watching and doing various games. So there's all levels of interventions that are required to right skill the next generation and the elder generation. Throughout the whole life cycle, we need to have these skills. Thank you.
Well, John and Dungtip, would you like to carry on with the same questions?
Well, first, I've been trying to say this more when I speak, and this is a personal belief. I believe that all people have worth. So, if you're under 30, can I ask a favor? Raise your hand if you're under 30 and someone has told you, no matter what job you pick, you have worth. Is that because I don't speak Thai? Did that question make sense? I'm not trying to be funny. Raise your hand if you're under 30. What did I just say? If someone has told you recently, no matter what job you pick, you have worth. A couple people. Well, that's good, but if most people didn't raise their hand, how many people here are under 30? Raise your hand if you're under 30 years old. Yeah, I think that the education that we need to teach every person on the planet is first and foremost to tell our young people, I don't care what job you do in the future, you have worth. That's the message I give my kids. Because in America, it's like age 2. How many languages do you know? Can you speak French right now? Like they're 3, Do we love our people despite what they'll do? And by the way, you may leave this talk saying, what was that guy talking about? He was supposed to talk about artificial intelligence. I think the artificial intelligence is thinking we can rely on technology to do the jobs of loving each other well if we can't do that now. The other thing I'll say is, as a younger person especially, do not believe that your data is worthless. Do not believe phrases like privacy is dead, etc. Your data, especially now, not just with artificial intelligence and algorithms today, but with virtual reality, extended reality, augmented reality, your data makes up who you are. And the logic that someone can track you, whether it's government surveillance or business tracking, those things aren't bad in and of themselves. But the logic that I should be able to track you to do whatever I want, and you have been trained to sign, we all have been trained to sign terms and conditions giving away that data. Where I'm speaking about the United States at least, I can't access data about myself, which means I have no control over my identity. That doesn't work for well-being. That doesn't work for work. That doesn't work for democracy. That doesn't work for in any way you to understand who you are as you move forward in this environment. So, education-wise, I want to educate all of you at any age. Your data is precious. Not an anti-business sentiment. There's things like blockchain, smart contracts, differential privacy, zero-knowledge proofs. Are these things perfect? Not at all. Can they be hacked? Of course. But my point is there's either one thing or the other. You have access to your data or you don't. Right now, we don't. And if any message comes back and says, you don't need access to your data, ask, why do you say I don't need access to my data? Because I'm happy to share it with you if we're going to have a relationship of trust. If your answer is, I can't access my data because I'm messing with your business model, then I'm not interested in giving you my data. That's the education about data we all need.
Well, I think John's response raised me a question on GDPR, which Dongtip has skipped. I wonder if the ability to access our own data and to remove the conditions is now available with GDPR, but may not be in our country as yet. Anybody care to answer that? I think the case that John mentioned that we are asking to sign terms and conditions to give away the data,
Yes.
but we are not able to access our own data.
That's correct. That's correct.
My question is, GDPR in Europe, did it enable European people to have that ability?
Okay, let's put it in two ways. From a technology standpoint and a technical standpoint, it's possible. What GDPR hopes to do is to get to the point where people will be able to own their own data, what we call data portability, and also in that way, privacy and security would, we were changing dimension where basically someone was talking, you can actually make a business model where instead now that Google and Facebook is using our data for free, if we can own our data and have legal rights around them, then we can charge these companies for using our data. And we'd only tell them to use the data that we want them to use because they are things that we want, products or things that, enhance our lives and well-being. So I think GDPR is trying to go towards that end. From a technical standpoint, it's possible. And I think the Web3C, the W3C, Tim Berners-Lee is moving towards a web that allows us to basically own our data. But from a legal framework, we don't have anything written yet. So I think we have a lot of work to do in that area. But that is a good point. One area where we can safeguard our future with any technology, be it AI or not, where data is involved, personal data, then I think, yes, we should have the technology to control. We should have the legal system to protect our rights. And I think that's important. The other thing I also want to mention is that I think, when we talk about alcohol, gambling, all the vices, we don't talk about social media. All the toxic fake news and all these so-called fake impressions we think of ourselves because we get feedbacks of likes, dislikes from these social medias, and in it I don't know whether it compensates the fact that your parents are not around, because we see a lot of suicides happening in the millennial generation, and why haven't we have harsher laws or regulations? There should be an age limit. There should be an education for people who want to use social media, so that they're more responsible and they know what they're doing, and not be like animals in a cage. So that's how I see it. Like you're this rat lab that you're like an animal that you get provoked and then you react, and that's how I see. And I also used to come from the tech community, and I find that we're becoming creatures of different platforms when we shouldn't be that way. And lastly, I think very important is AI is taking us to the next level towards quantum computing, where algorithms are going to be written by themselves, not just written by humans. And that's when it gets out of control. But the first set of algorithms will be written by humans that also have biases, prejudices, and we are not perfect. So once the AI is able to write its own program, I hope I'm not around. I'm a bit afraid of, what is happening with just social media. It's just getting out of hand with just social media. You get all this reaction and you start reacting back. Or your esteem is based on, reactions from the, these comments. And they are not your friends. Some of them are not even friends, right? They're just fake friends. So, and then you want to talk about AI. Jack Ma was saying the other day that in the age of AI, humans are going to live beyond 100 years old. Gee whiz, I hope I don't. If I don't mean to take a negative turn on it, but I think we need to be responsible. AI is very different from electricity, or the wheel, or the turbine engine, or the steam engine. It's a whole different animal, and I think there's some degree of caution here. If you had to buy a medicine, there is warning at the back. Can we have some sort of a warning? What we're doing, because I think that level of responsibility, not just ethics, we need responsibility. Things that we should do and we shouldn't do should be clearly outlined as well. Thank you.
Okay, I will go for one more round, then let the floor ask. Well, AI is very powerful and can be abused, just like any other technologies. It can put into bad use. But if we combine AI and inequalities of the scenario that John mentioned, that only less than 1% of the population controls the whole country in terms of economic movements. Now, if the thing go together, the rich people also owns AI and systems. Now, how can we do about it? Any ideas?
Yep, I think that's a very good question. That's part of the discussions with the IEEE at the moment. It is exactly what's happening. If you look at the issue of social media, who's owning our data, I want to come back to that. I think it's really important, the message that our data is given. We've put GDPR in place to make you feel comfortable, but you still don't have a control on what people are doing with your data. So it's the business model of the big giants that are developing and using AI to analyze the big data, do deep dives into what you're doing, and then target you as a commodity. What your rights are at the moment are nothing. Which is why at UNESCAP I was talking about the regulators. We need better regulations. But not only do we need regulations that look at the space of AI and the human engagement with social media and the consequences, but we need the ability for consequences to enforce the regulation. So we are a long, long way away. Number one, we don't have regulations here in Asia Pacific that have the teeth. Number two, we're not able to enforce the regulations. And number three, we suffer lack of awareness. So our people are actually even more putting the data out there to be exploited. And there's cases for farmers because of lots of the big company wants farmers' data, what the farmers use, their patterns, and then they're targeted without having even the awareness that their data is being sold. Some farmers are getting aware now and are asking to be compensated to incorporate their data on some ICT projects. I know there's one in Malawi at the moment on this. But it's all about awareness and our responsibility to these firms as governments first and the civil society to actually challenge the status quo.
Any addition, John?
Sure. Technical expertise, right here. The microphone wasn't on. I want to end on a couple of positive, I'll say some negative things too, but here's a positive thing. If you get a chance, rent a movie called Happy the Movie. It's a documentary that came out 3 or 4 years ago, and it was the most popular documentary on Netflix, iTunes that year. I bring this up because if you study positive psychology, again, remember happiness, in positive psychology, there's 2 types of happiness. Hedonic happiness is momentary happiness. It's very ephemeral. It's very much focused on subjective truth, meaning I may like one movie, you may not. I might like a certain food, you may not. It's not right or wrong, it's just part of who we are as humans. However, consumerism targets that, right? Short-term happiness. Oh, I could use some chocolate. That's not bad in and of itself. It's a question of balance. Chocolate too much is the issue. The other type of happiness is what's called in Greek eudaimonia, or long-term flourishing. These two types of happiness, according to positive psychology, are the same around the world. They do not differ in different countries. The movie, I bring this up because it's fascinating. It starts, I always forget, I think it's a guy in the Philippines. He's got a rickshaw, you know, the carriage that you pull behind you. And he's barefoot and he's running through streets with, you know, probably guys that look like me, you know, businessmen tapping on their phones while he's driving them. And they interview him and say, "Are you happy?" And they show him at his house. I'm using an air quote because his house is essentially a shanty. I don't mean to be rude, I just mean it's sort of a hut. And he says, "I am very happy." He says, "Why are you happy?" And he says, "I have a family and a wife and kids," and he shows all these his family and they're smiling. And they said, "What makes you unhappy?" He says, "Well, in monsoon season it gets difficult." And I'm laughing this thinking, you know, as an American, you know, I get upset sometimes like, oh, I had to wait for 60 seconds for my coffee to get made, right? And here's a guy who's driving a rickshaw, getting hit with a stick by some of his clients. And he says he's happy. And in America and Japan, two of the, quote, you know, leading economies, and I hate this term, developing and developed countries. I understand why we use them, but I don't like those terms because to me it makes it feel like developing means you're not there yet, right? America's there. Feels very arrogant to me, frankly. But in America and Japan, I'm 50, right? The second leading cause of death for men my age is suicide in America and Japan. Now, I don't want to get morbid, but that's obviously self-inflicted, right? This is not a question of like coronary heart disease, am I making the wrong choices? This means that my well-being, by most people's definition, is at such a state that I am taking myself out of the picture. I'm not trying to judge people's decisions. Again, my dad was a psychiatrist. I understand aspects of grief and suicide to a degree other people don't, because I grew up with it in one sense. But I think we have to ask ourselves the question, I'm going to start morbid, then get positive. What do we need to have happen as a human species before we say enough? I think when in, quote, 2 developing nations, suicide is the second leading cause of death for men, and young people, the numbers are growing. It's at pandemic levels from the World Health Organization. Young people, ages 13, 14, 15, where people will say, well, it's this person's own decision to take their life. Again, I don't want to be morbid. We have to be real about this. As a parent, I cannot imagine ever saying, well, if one of my kids really feels like they want to commit suicide, that's their choice. Does that sound like an absurd question to ask? I couldn't agree more. Why are we letting it happen? Why are we saying, oh, it's too bad. Let's talk about machines, what they might do in 25 years. Isn't that cool? And then our planet. Sorry, this is something I've been thinking about constantly in the past 3 months. 7 million people last year died from pollution. This isn't some like crazy thing. It's last year. There was a hurricane in Florida. We were just talking about this at lunch, South Carolina. People were evacuated today. Climate, you hear these terms like existential climate stuff. I've been reading a great book if you want to read. It's called The Uninhabitable Earth. It's not that, you know, the flood is going to take over the entire planet in 2 years. It's that the costs of the infrastructure damage and the amount of stuff that's happening to our planet means that life for everybody, including the 1 or 2%, there's this myth that you can, you know, protect yourself by maybe going to the moon or Mars from the climate. But let me make this a positive turnaround, which is I bring up the story with this guy from the Philippines because I'm not in any way saying that people, first of all, human rights have to be honored, first and foremost. Second of all, you have to have access to water, etc. But here's the guy who knows I've got my family and my kids and my neighbors, and his well-being is higher than a lot of other people you watch in the film. AI is great, right? There's so many aspects of different types of artificial intelligence that are helping with regards to mental illness, that are helping with regards to the climate. The reason I'm focusing so much on GDP is whatever we want to call good, air quote good, unless we have metrics that we all agree on saying, this is the goal. What do I believe the goal for AI is? Not just good, air quote, right? Because each of us will define good in different ways. I believe that the goal of all technology that we build should be to increase human flourishing, long-term human flourishing, not just happiness, but human rights are honored and then human flourishing goes up. That's the metric. And ecological flourishing. Those two things. So I want to say thank you to our moderator, first of all, because you've been wonderful. But to say that when we talk about AI and like, let's think about good things or bad things, great discussions to have. But I think the most effective question for me that I like asking, and I'm not saying that I'm right, I'm not interested in being right, but I do feel this makes more sense than saying, well, this is good, that's good, this is good. What do we all agree at the end when we build something we want to do? Because the GDP says what we want to do is increase exponential growth, and that one number, which usually goes back to money or financial things only, is still what we're all looking at. And right now, again, going back to suicide and the climate, that's where it has led us. You're allowed to get upset, and the last thing I'll say here is Greta, that young woman from Sweden, is that her name? Yeah. Who knows Greta? Raise your hand if you know that young woman. This is a hero. Do you know who this woman is? She's 14 years old, she's got Asperger's. She is leading a charge for young people to say, I don't want to live on a planet where I won't be able to breathe. And she is doing non-violent protest. And she was at the World Economic Forum, and she actually said, not to be fearful, but she said, I do want you to panic. She said, I want you to panic because I'm 14 years old, and the world that I live on now and the world that I will live on, if we don't make drastic change now, I will not be able to live. And people our age, I'm 50, she's saying to us, to me, and I feel this every single day, and this is my last point, honestly. I do not want to look at my kids 10 years, 20 years from now and say I get embarrassed on a panel and I wanted to be polite. I got worried on a panel that I was going to say the wrong thing. I am more interested in improving long-term human flourishing for people in Thailand, for people in the United States, for people in China, and people in the US, and our planet, than I am in anything else.
Thank you, John. We have only 1.5 minutes left. I wonder if we give it... Okay. Now we are open for the floor. Anyone would like to ask any questions? I can't see. Okay, there is one.
Well, my question relates to what all four people have spoken today, which is about this tension between technology for humanity and development and technology which appears to be in many ways posing a danger to humanity. Now, how much of this tension is attributable to technology per se or its characteristics, and how much of it is to do with the context in which this technological development is taking place? If it is the case that technology development is driven by that 1%, which for whom the GDP is the most important figure, that perhaps is the reason why this same technology is not usable to ensure that we all work 1 hour and have the rest of the day to have a richer life, in a sense that GDP doesn't measure, but is used to ensure that some people work for long hours, have drudgery of hours, and several others don't find work at all. And a world in which the monopoly over production, which was a feature of the world till the middle of the 20th century, has been, how far is it an attempt to also neutralize the effects of the erosion of that monopoly over production by creating a monopoly over technology and the control over that technology? So is that the processes which are shaping the development and the use of technology is how much of the problem lies in that rather than in the technology per se? And how does one, in such a context, separate the so-called good, the idea that technology has positive benefits, which emanates from actually the monopoly and the need to put forward or push technologies, and from the real substantive good that technology can do?
John, would you like to respond?
Sure. And are we done? Because I didn't want to. How much time do we have left?
Yeah. Time is up, but maybe...
Oh, all right. Well, then you had two parts to your question. How much of the issue is about the framing of the technology? 100%. That one's easy. I keep trying to come back to other solutions or whatever else, but, and by the way, I used to work in corporate settings. I want to be fair to the business world. When you deal with shareholder law, it's law that every quarter the priority is to increase returns exponentially. When I worked with major global brands, you didn't walk in a room and go, hey, we're just going to maintain our numbers, and yay, that wasn't. So there's that. The technology is awesome. I want to focus on this before we end, right? I'm seeing AI being used to help soldiers returning from war, struggling with PTSD. Knowing they're talking to a bot means they can deal with shame before they speak to a human therapist. AI is helping diagnose cancer, right? All these beautiful things. Unless the framing of how we apply these technologies, and our focus in IEEE, I should say, is asking these questions first. This conversation we're having, it's cool if I'm not right in one sense, because I think I am in terms of improving human well-being in the environment. But if you ask these things before you build it, then you don't build something where you're like, if I don't get this out into the market, we're ruined. That's not the time to ask about things, right? Move fast and break things. We have been moving fast, we have broken too much. It is time now to say, what is the goal of all that we build? And the answer for me of how to get there is to change the key performance indicators, is to allow businesses and governments to say, beyond just GDP, hence the whole beyond GDP movement. Here are the other things that you're going to be held responsible for, accountable for, and that's people and the planet. But we have to allow and change laws. In America, we have what's called the B Corp movement. It changes the legal structure for companies. So they can be allowed to say, well, I'm not going to make my fiscal numbers because I'm focusing on the environment. The answer has to come back from the government and from business, and to say, well, good, you got to focus on that or the planet won't be here. And guess what? Sustainable business means we actually do need a planet, and we actually do need healthy young people who can take whatever jobs are available down the road.
Well, I would like to... We have run out of time. Perhaps you have to be very short, okay?
I just addressed this question to Dr. Sama and John. I think the key words for your presentation is humanity. See, AI have opened up great opportunities, but for me, it is a threat to humanity. You name it. What happened in the United States? The mass killing. How it happened? Because of the game or whatever. How is the terrorism around the world use AI for bringing this terrible crime to humankind? You speak about the family time. Family hardly meet in real person. They just go for telephone and using. This day, we have the campaigns to lessen the time that people spend on lines or on iPhone. So maybe I'd like to share with you that this context should be addressed in the term of humanity, human rights protection. So I think that would be correct. We don't want to be the richest man in the world. How rich we are to enough. So humanity is a key word. Maybe we should add trade, humanity, and development.
I like that. Very, very good.
Thank you very much. Would you like to?
I'm dying to respond to both of you because I completely agree with the structure. There's a structural problem with the framework for how we do implementation. And the earlier panel, you guys talked about what is it for? What is the purpose? And if the purpose is development for all, then good development. But what we're doing right now, there's a UN agency called Global Compact, and there's obviously the ITU. What we're doing is we're actually creating, and I'll take that as metrics to measure CEOs of the giant companies for the integrity and the ethical use of technology, so that social media, people like Mark Zuckerberg, Facebook, cannot just say, gee, I didn't know how to take those terrorism videos down that radicalize young, innocent 13 years old who not only killed the neighbors but then blew themselves up in Manchester at a concert, but also girls, to her point, where people are bombarded by social media to reduce their own self-worth. You're too fat, you're ugly, and then they feel humiliated and they kill themselves. We have this problem in the UK, and the responsibility is with the government, but it's with the companies. So now we're going to create not financial indicators, as my brother is saying here, that yep, we got the GDP, and we need to change it, but we also going to change the compensation of the CEOs, that they get ranked, publicly ranked, that your company, your Facebook, your Google, your YouTube is showing this inhumane, inappropriate content, and this is the consequences. But the key is to all agree on humanity and values. Once we get there, then hopefully, God willing, inshallah, this will be something that next time it's done.
Can we just clap for that?
This would be the last word.
Yes, no, because I was kind of not using my quota, but I don't mean to be pitching men against women, but let's be honest, we come from the tech community. We know that most of these algorithms are written by men. And it's not that men are wrong or men are evil, but the thing is there's no balance within the tech community when we write these type of programs. So I think the inclusivity has to happen at the level of the tech community, at the schools, the engineering schools, where there are balance between men and women. And then, then there's a healthy exchange between them. So I think the context of the relationship between a man and a woman in a healthy environment that is tech-driven is still predominantly men. And I say this out of respect for the technical community that I still belong to, but it has to change. And some women in the tech community behave like men. So again, that has to change, and that we need to really recognize that the feminine side of building algorithms, beautiful algorithms, are not dependent on men. So I leave with that remark, and I'm sorry if you might not like this remark.
Well, thank you very much. Now I believe that we have to come to a close. Okay, 10 seconds.
As a former writer of the anti-monopolistic law, is anybody you do not agree that we should curtail the power of the technology company?
We should contain it. We all agree.
I think you agree with what Selma proposed. Yes.
All agree. All agree. Absolutely, globally.
We need antitrust.
Well, I would like to thank the audience for your very active participation. And I would like to summarize in only 3 words, okay? Humanity, love, and sustainable of the earth for the future, for this session. And would you like to join me? Thank you, all our panelists.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for our 3 speakers and our significant moderators. Such provoking and interesting discuss we've been through together. Thank you to Dr. Salma Abbasi. Thank you to Kun Duang Jai Chomprang. Thank you to Mr. John C. Havens and our moderator, Dr. Tawi Sak. This is such a wonderful moment that we've been sharing, and we have taken part in this. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we will take a short break for 10 minutes, and then we come back for another session. So 10 minutes, we'll be meeting once again at 3:20 over here. So please relax and enjoy. Thank you.